There we go. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. This afternoon we are on presentation. This is number 8. This is 8, number 8, even though we've met 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 times. I did 2 in one go in the earlier stages. So we've reached now, remember we started just before 1843. Again, we were talking about William Miller and the things that, well, slightly before that actually, the things that William Miller had gone through in reference to the war that he had gone through and the Great Awakening that came about because of that. We talked about William Miller and all the things that he went through in reference to his prophecy and the things that he had gotten wrong, and as time went on, through further calculations, it was found that he was a year off and those sorts of things. We had, again, the great disappointment in 1844, and at that point, that's when other things started to get looked at, what was going on, those sorts of things. And then we moved into the fact that out of that came three sects, should I say. One that believed that nothing had happened, one that believed that it was a spiritual return of Jesus Christ, and ones that believed that something had happened, but they didn't know what it was. And so out of that came the Seventh-day Adventist Church, that very last group. And we found ourselves growing and growing and growing from that day. Some of you will remember 1863. Actually, I think it's 160 years today, isn't it? Is it today? Is it, what's the date today? 22nd. No. They told me the Great Disappointment. I'm talking about when we became a full-fledged church. I think it's 160 years today. Yeah. No, yeah, we're talking about when we actually became incorporated as a church, the Seventh-day Adventist, the General Conference. So we're looking at 1863, May, I think it's the 20th. I think it's May 20th, 1863, yeah. So I think it may be like 160 years today. It may be an anniversary for us today, yeah. Oh, they did? Okay. Okay, yes. Okay, yes. Because I kind of heard that today too, so it kind of just actually jogged my memory again just now. So again, we're looking from that point forward up until this point. We've talked about how we've arrived at our doctrine, and we spoke about how it was arrived at through Bible study and Bible study alone. We spoke about the gift of prophecy and all those things, how that actually came about. When it comes to lifestyle changes and things of that nature. We've seen how initially there were sects of the movement that did not want to organize, but we found out that organization became a necessary part if we were going to grow and if we were going to be efficient. Well, now after all of this growth has happened and things have started to really become heady, we got to the point where it came a point for us to now reorganize ourselves because again, we weren't as efficient, as we needed to be. And so the call went out that we needed to reorganize so that we can go forward even more efficiently as we started to go forward. Again, because we had sort of amassed those sorts of things. We had amassed not only properties, but buildings and everything else. And again, we were dealing with all sorts of other laws and all sorts of other different lands, so we had to reorganize ourselves. And so this is where we find ourselves today. The era of reorganization and crisis between 1901 and 1910. So at the beginning of the 20th century, that's where we are, yeah? So now, what the tenets, all the things that we believe in, these things are pretty much nailed down. Now, we know what those are at this point. We're pretty much settled in what our beliefs are. Not to say that everything we're going to believe is actually already arrived, but we're pretty settled in what we do believe at this point. So we had our doctrine sorted out, our lifestyle sorted out, and our worldwide mission. All of those things are already in order. And then we have institutional support. Remember, that was an issue that we were dealing with when it came to the pastors and the missionaries, how they were going to be taken care of and all of those sorts of things. Even that's been sorted out at this point. The fire truck just wanted to emphasize the points that I just made just now. So again, it had outgrown its 1863 organization, which I stated earlier. Because again, it was a very simple organization, but as you can imagine, when we started getting bigger and bigger, it becomes much more complex. And so we had to readjust ourselves to be able to do things correctly. And so what was happening? We're busting out of the seams, yes? It was no longer functional for the increasingly complex, which is what I was saying. We're multinational at this point, and the way we were in 1863, that organization was just not cutting it anymore. So what happens when you want to change? Push back, right? People push back. This is not easy. Nobody wants to do it. Well, most people don't anyway. And so the necessary structural changes of the early 1900s were just as resisted as the doctrinal changes of 1888. Do you remember what happened in 1888? Minneapolis. Yes, exactly. Right, you remember all the turmoil that happened when it came to that, how it was the most explosive camp meeting that we actually had? Well, it was very much like that because that was bringing about change. This is bringing about change to our structure, but in 1888, it was bringing back change to our beliefs. In other words, the balance between righteousness by faith and the law, right? So leaders with vested interests also resist change, correct? Does that make sense? Why would they resist change? Why would the leaders resist change? There you go. There you go. Why would the leaders resist change? Because they don't want to give up power. And that's always the case, right? That's always the case. Power that is gained, or should I say received, is not easily given up. And I'll tell you one thing for sure, that this is not just necessarily in institutions. You can see this in a house. You can see this in a marriage. You can see these in all sorts of different relationships. But the power dynamic is a certain way. The one who is in power, they don't easily want to give it up at all. So it causes stress and strife in any type of relationship. So again, the leaders themselves, if we started reorganizing, let me give you a case in point. Yeah, okay, I'll touch on that. Oops, sorry. One of the issues that we deal with now, because again, it was mentioned, we talked about the black work earlier, yes? At one point, maybe a couple of weeks ago, was it last week? Well, a couple of weeks ago at this point. We talked about that, and then we recognized at that point, or they recognized at that point, that there needed to be separate conferences. Some for blacks and some for whites, right? Well, a part of the argument that's going on even now is, well, why can't we get rid of those things? We're supposed to be so integrated. Why can't we get rid of those things, right? Well, what do you think one of the first things that's going to be a problem with when we talk about we're going to amalgamate? What do you think the problem's going to be? Oops. Who's going to be in charge? It's a power thing, right? Who's going to be in charge? And at the end of it all, specifically for those who have found themselves, I'll get to you. You have a mic? Got mics, guys? Okay, yeah. You guys can have that one because no one's up here yet. Yeah. So specifically those who are, how do I put it? Those who have traditionally, I say traditionally, been in charge, they don't want to give up power. And for those who have recently, and I use recently sparingly, or should I say relatively, those who have recently received power, they don't want to give it up either. So when you start talking about amalgamating them, how's that going to work out? So you see, so the question would be, is it worth going through it? And again, this is just my thinking. I'm not saying that this is the conference's thinking, but it may very well be when you think about it. Is it worth going through all of that that might cause such a massive rift in the body that we forget about what the work is about? Because everybody's fighting for power. And so the mission goes on the side because everybody's worrying about who's in power. So sometimes we have to use wisdom. I mean, some things happen and they're not necessarily ideal. We agree with that. But again, we have to also ask ourselves, okay, to put what we think is quote unquote right, what's it going to cost? So Brother Gilbert, yes.
Yes, I think one of the problems was also that when we were just in America, we had a general conference that was able to control the work.
Yes.
But now we're going on to Australia, we're going to Africa.
Yes.
And so these one minds were not enough to be able to control all the work.
Exactly,
and
exactly.
So there was a need for reorganization.
Yes, indeed, and yes.
And so that's one of the issues that they fought with.
Indeed.
That was trying to stretch the work.
Indeed. And just while you're on it, just while you want to sit there or whatever, why do you think that they may not be able to control the work? Because again, like you said, it was based in the US, but why do you think that they may not be able to control the work?
It was growing, one of the reasons it was growing so quick.
Yeah, it was growing so quick, yes, but what happens? What happens when you go to different other countries?
Cultures different.
Right? You're dealing with different cultures, right? Yeah. And so very often, just because you think it's great and wonderful in your culture doesn't mean that you're an expert in somebody else's culture. Because the truth of the matter is we're not even experts in our own, so much less are we experts in somebody else's, right? Yeah. So again, this is why we had to reorganize, and so very often what happens, and we'll get to that, is that the very basis of it gets to the point where it becomes a bit more decentralized. Yes?
And one of the things I think is like in some cultures, like when I was in Fiji, the men were like a dress type of style
right.
garment. And
yes.
And you heard talking about not allow men to or women to dress like men.
Right,
There's a
right.
Culture that
Exactly,
men dress like
exactly.
what
I agree.
people are dressed, but
I
in the
agree.
dress, it's got a whole
Yeah.
different.
And then it comes, agreed. So again, it gets to the point where as those in their particular, so in other words, is this a point of salvation? That's what it comes down to. And how do we allow for the cultural differences to exist without necessarily undermining the gospel itself? So again, if we here in America, or should I say, well, those in America, because they were in charge, if they went and decided that they wanted to impose their own culture, just like Brother Gilbert said or whatever, so you're going to tell me that I can't wear my wear because you guys said, well, I don't like your wear anyway. So why would I get to the point where I want to wear what you wear? I didn't even like what you wear. So again, these things had to take place. So for various reasons, and I'm glad you guys brought those things up. I said that part already. So the reorganization starts taking place. So it had to endure another reform and another crisis of personalities, right? Because again, we're talking about power. So again, let's go to 1888, yes? And some of you remember Jones and Wagner, the young guys that came in with the righteousness by faith argument, yes? And then what was the response of those who were considered to be the gurus or the experts or the ones that everybody looked to for the right interpretation of what we believe? What was their response? Do you remember? They rose up, right? They were not pleased with the fact that somebody was coming with an opinion that was different from theirs. As a matter of fact, they got so upset, they even got upset with Ellen White because she sided and said at least they should be heard. We haven't gotten to the point whether we agree or not, but at least we should be able to have a conversation about it. Well, very often, when it comes to these sorts of things, because of personalities, then sometimes people don't get to speak. Because you have the strong personalities, yes.
Yeah. And sometimes they would even have send her into Australia.
Exactly.
So that she wouldn't be
to
in a
get rid of
meeting.
her, exactly.
Yeah.
Right, so, which is interesting you said that, right? Because for as much, how do I put it? For as much influence as she had, many people, because a lot of people like to think, well, she ran the whole movement. Well, if that's the case, how were they able to send her to Australia? So she didn't want to go. She didn't want to go, but see you later, sis. Get moving, you know what I mean? So by 1910, we were better equipped, and this is from 1900 to 1910, remember, we were better equipped to accomplish its mission. Why? Denominational reorganization, this is what started taking place. So again, it was a pivotal year for Adventist history. That's 1901. Obviously, we're at this point where we're just starting the reorganization. So at both GC sessions, the 1901 and the 1903, SCAs are thoroughly reorganized. So you can imagine the amount of work that went in between those sessions, right? To sort of get it together, because then you had to get everybody to agree. At least the masses to agree. You're never going to get everyone to agree. So what were the main challenges with the 1863 organization? Well, power was too centralized, like I said, right? And it was centralized in the GC president. Now, no one's going to come out and say that the GC president is not supposed to have influence. That's just the nature of the fact that he's the leader or she's the leader. They're going to have influence. But once all the power becomes centralized in their hands, you have a perfect recipe for abuse. That's just the nature of human beings. 1860s and 1870s, what? The president was able to give personal attention to the work of the church. Why? Because it was small. It was small. So because it was small and it wasn't too great, the president was able to give personal attention. But once it starts going from country to country, neighborhood to neighborhood, languages to languages, well, I don't know any president that's that great. So 1863 to 1901, the evangelistic force jumped from what? 30 to 1,500. Local conferences from 6 to 100. Membership grew from 3,500 to 78,000. You think one president can run all of that? So you can imagine things start getting out of control, right? If one person's actually starting to run this, because this is way too much for any one person to do that. Now, let's go back again and ask ourselves, where could the wisdom come from in this area? Some of you will remember that Moses, when he had them out in the wilderness, Moses was dealing with all sorts of things and he was getting burnt out. You remember that? Yeah. And his father-in-law, Jethro, came and said, Moses, what are you doing? I mean, you do bad for yourself and you do a disservice for the people. Pick a few wise men, those that you know have the Holy Spirit in them or whatever, and set them over hundreds and fifties and tens. Do you remember that? Right. The same mindset, no one person is able to do it all. No one person is able to make it. So again, you have those at the 10 level that make the major decisions at that level. They control those. Those at the 50 level, they make decisions at that level. Those at the hundreds, and anything beyond that, then you go to the GC president. So there's some things, even though he may be aware of, he doesn't need to make a decision about because the decision's already made. So now he can concentrate on the things that are really important. It's just like your job. Can you imagine? Your boss has 1,000 employees and every employee wants to come down and have a personal conversation with the boss. What work would he get done? Well, it's the same situation with this here. Yes, I'm sorry. Mike, just one sec.
Just a question. Can a GC president be a woman now?
Good question, but I don't think no. I think no. Because again, the issue of organized, first of all, you have to be ordained, right? You have to be ordained first. And so that's the issue right now, so I don't think so at this point.
Yeah, he or she.
I said he or she as a normal state of saying, yes. But again, no. So that's why you asked the question? Okay, let me be careful about what I say. Let me be careful because let me be careful about what I say. I'm really not political, but yeah, I'm really not. Yeah, I know. Yeah. Yes, indeed. Thank you. Yes. No, you do need the mic because other people might be listening. Yes, and I believe that's right. And again, so these are also the areas that are deciding at this point to go against what the General Conference has ruled on. So let's be clear about that part, yes? And what's going to happen with that? Well, the jury's still out and we'll wait to see. But at this point, at the General Conference level, that's not happening at this point. So again, what was another challenge that came about because of these very same things and these changes, or should I say the 1863 model? There was a lack of institutional unity. So we've got publishing houses, we've got Sabbath school, we have medical and other branches of outreach operated independently of the GC. So if they're operating independently and everybody's doing their own thing, then it becomes a problem, doesn't it? All right? So how do we maintain, should I say, not only the structural unity, but the theological unity as well of what it is that we believe and all of these things are going on? A structure had to be put in place where we could more easily keep control of these things, because what we don't want is everybody running off doing their own thing. What was the other problem? Remember that? Inadequate financial control over SDA entities, yeah? So again, if you're not controlled, if you're not organized, then it's going to become a problem, yes? So that was the reality of medical publishing and educational branches. Why was that a problem? Well, who was controlling the money? Yes.
And I think we have a good structure in the sense that I know one time I had some issues with some of the things that were being taught, and I couldn't go to the general conference with my issue.
Agreed.
They sent me to the pastors here looked at it. I had to send it off to the school in our category, and then from them, so if anything did come to the general conference, they saw that it was be something of weight.
Exactly.
So we did have a structure, but also keep in mind that after 1901, we have to understand her writings according to time and event.
Yes.
For instance, there was a time when she said, send your children to Battle Creek. But after 1901, she said, don't send your children to Battle Creek. Because
based on circumstances that
catalog will teach you pantheism.
Indeed.
She said
that's a problem.
She said the same thing about the General Conference leadership.
Right.
You know, she said they were the voice of God, and then after 1901, they're not the voice of God. But she didn't say stop having a General Conference set up.
Yes, indeed.
It was just that at that time, the voice was not being representative of Christ. And so sometimes we have to study our writings according to time and event. And a lot of people miss that.
Well, not sometimes.
People miss that.
It always has to be in context.
Yes.
It always has to be in context. I agree.
Yes.
I agree. And again, just based on the fact that you said that, again, this is a challenge that we deal with, and I don't know specifically how much it happens now, but I know when I first came in, it was a major issue. You know, where basically people would take her writings and beat people over the head with it. Yeah. That's what it seemed like, and I was like, oh gosh, I mean, we're in love with this. I mean, it's gracious, it's crazy, right? But again, sometimes what you may find sometimes is that because so many people have misused it, then this is a reason why others don't want to read them at all. because they've been mistreated by them, believing that what these people and how these people have used it against them is the actual reality of what's in them, but that's not necessarily so. Which is why I would say at the end of it all, make sure, and not to say that you're not going to get along with the people, you're always going to have issues because we're talking about human beings, but keep your eyes on Christ. Yes. Don't look at the people. So centralization and decentralizing needed to occur. So there is a concept of centralized decentralization, yes? I know that sounds a bit, but we'll get it. So presidential administrative authority needed to be dispersed, which makes perfect sense because we can't have it all in one person, as we were saying, when it comes to the General Conference president who is in one country and is trying to run the whole world. GC needed more direct authority over the various branches. Again, because they were so decentralized, well, sorry, the power was centralized, but the other branches were decentralized, and there was no way to sort of keep a grip on them and what was going on. So there had to be a way to sort of organize ourselves more efficiently so that we would be able to better organize and run the church. So beginning in 1897, under the leadership of W.C. White, which is William White, which is her husband, and A.G. Daniels, Australia adopted the South African solution, which, well, interesting, right, employed a secretary for each department who worked on the direction of the conference president. So now there were those who have different departments underneath the president or whatever, and they were responsible for different things. So again, there's to a degree a decentralization of what's going on so that different areas were not left undone. So in other words, what happens is very often, if you have one person, then whatever their favorite things are dealing with, that's what they'll deal with. Whatever they see as a priority, that's what they would deal with. And very often, and some of you can remember this in the book of Acts, that the Greek women were talking about they weren't getting service. You remember that? Because the Jews were dealing with the Jews, but they weren't necessarily dealing with the Greeks because they didn't see them necessarily as a priority, or it could be relationships, it could be whatever reason, but the fact of the matter is that they weren't dealing with everyone. And so what do? You put other people in charge over specific areas so that this is the area of specificity. Specificity, yes. This is where they actually put their attention to make sure that everybody and everything gets dealt with. So the Australian Union Conference also adopted the South African solution. So again, we can see this is starting to move a bit more. So by the end of the 19th century, under the leadership of Daniels, the Australian church had a model that met the problems of centralization and decentralization. So again, it's having a leader, and then it's having other people that are responsible for different departments. Do we not have that here in Bermuda? Yes? We have a president, we have a board, and then we have those that are responsible for different departments in the conference. So by 1900, what are we looking at? Ellen White returns from Australia after a decade, so she's been there for 10 years. So he mentioned about the fact that Ellen White had gone to Australia, right? Not necessarily because she wanted to. But then again, it was a good thing that she did go there because she accomplished some things down there that maybe wouldn't have been accomplished, yeah? The Avondale School and that model of schooling and things of that nature. So when she comes back, so she's been away for 10 years now. Now, I don't know about you, but you go away for 10 years and then you come back and expect the things to be the same. I mean, I can remember going back to school. I used to be actually, when I went to come back and be amazed, like just be driving through town. What the building's going, when did this one come up? I mean, it doesn't take that long, does it? And there was organizational overload. So what were the aberrations that she came up or encountered when she came? Pantheism. Does anyone know what pantheism is? Yes, anyone?
God is in everything.
God is in everything, exactly. So is that biblical? Why is everybody quiet?
He's omnipresent, but he's not in everything.
Yes, indeed, exactly, exactly. That's right, that's right. So a strand view of perfectionism, right? Leadership squashed this aberration quickly. So again, they recognize that this is going to be a problem, and they squashed it quickly, which is a good thing. Now, how they did that, I don't know, but the fact was that they sought to sort it out, or they endeavored to sort it out immediately. So pantheism was more problematic. And again, you remember who the guy is, right there, John Harvey Kellogg, right? Very influential person, yes? Some of you are so influential, you're probably still eating the cereal. He's serious. Yes. Mike, you need a mic.
Well, let me say one, and I apologize.
Okay, yeah.
I think one of the things, what she called the pantheism, the alpha of apostasy.
Yes.
She said that the omega will be of a more startling nature. So she saw even things getting worse as time went on.
Yes, indeed.
And one of the things that helped us to bundle around the pantheism issue was first she Gore burnt down the school. The school
Yes,
burnt
yes,
down
yes,
in
yes.
1902.
Yes, indeed.
And the Review and Herald.
Not just the school, but go on. Yeah.
And the Review and Herald was burnt down in 1902.
Yes.
And so God had helped us in some ways.
Yes.
To bring about the organization, and Ms. White, we depended a lot on Ms. White to be able to write the right things to quiet down some of the issues
Agreed.
that were happening in our church.
Agreed.
And she addressed them. She made her voice known.
Indeed.
In many of the events, especially when it came to Carlo. He was a great man.
Yeah. Very
You know,
influential.
He
Very
felt
influential.
that because of his brilliance, that why is God working through Ms. White to bring the health message when
Yeah,
he's
it's
got
crazy.
the great mind,
Yeah.
this inventing machinery and all that kind of stuff. And so you get kind of, I'm the big cheese when it comes
Yeah,
to
we get that.
medical
We're
missionary
talking
work.
about the human experience, right?
Yeah,
We're talking
and
about the
so
human experience, yeah.
Why is God consulting with God? Why do I have to consult
Listen
with
to
Ms.
her.
White?
Yeah, but I can talk to God myself, right? Yeah, I agree. And you mentioned something about God burning down schools and things of that nature. I'm trying to remember what year it actually was, but there was also a time when he was trying to get them out of Battle Creek. And they wouldn't come out of Battle Creek. And so God burnt down the publishing house and he burnt down the sanitarium. Right, it was around this exact year. So that forced everybody to leave because it was a major hub that everybody used to come to because it was considered to be the center of Adventism. He was like, oh, you all don't want to leave? Okay, me fix. And burnt down all the major things that were there. So I told you whatever, that the firemen knew they were supernatural fires. No matter what they did, they came there, the buildings had burned down so fast. After the first one happened, the next time when they came back, the literal fire marshal said, is that an Adventist building? We're not going out there. Because there's nothing we can do, he said. There's nothing we can do. It's going to burn down before we even get there. Yeah, it's crazy. It was crazy. It was crazy. Yeah. I can't imagine what that must have been looking like. But again, we are looking to see that even people from outside of our denomination are recognizing that God is in this movement. So the day before the 1901 GC session. Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
I was just asking if you had an example of the pantheism that she was addressing.
A specific example, okay, first of all, we will go to the idea of this man, Kellogg now, who is a very influential man. And because he's very influential, people are actually coming to the sanatorium that he was responsible for. And so if you have a man talking about God's in you and God's in everything else around you, that starts becoming a problem when it comes to theology, right? So again, these are the things that we're dealing with. And because he was so influential, people started getting on board with it. That was the problem. And so that's why she had to address that, because again, that undermines so much of what we believe. Yeah.
And mind you, it really hurt Ellen G. White because that was her foster son. She raised him from a little
Kellogg,
boy.
yes.
Yeah, so, so it was a
So
hurt
she had to
to
stand
her
for
also.
truth, yeah?
Yeah.
She had to stand for truth. And again, I'm glad you brought up that point too, because again, sometimes our relationships can challenge us when it comes to standing on the side of truth. And it might mean that we lose some relationships. And so for the cause of the gospel, sometimes we have to be willing to sacrifice even some of our friends and family so that we can go forward at the end of it. Yes, who was it? Was it you?
She financed him going to school.
Well, there you go, right? So again, she was very vested in him, right?
Very vast. She financed him going to school.
And it's very sad. It's very sad. Anyway, so the day before 1901 GC session, she had her calling for new blood and an entire new organization. So this is where she's at right now. We need an entirely new organization. And we need new blood. Why do we need new blood? I'm sorry? Time for change. And new blood old blood has a problem with what?
Change.
So again, we get used to it. So again, no, this is interesting, even for us as time goes on. which is why it's necessary that we consistently get new blood in the church. Because we have people that will come in or whatever, first of all, who are aware of what's going on in the world. That's number one, because they came out of it, number one. And number two, they're not so bound by tradition. So now, very often, we think that what we do traditionally when it comes to evangelism and all these sorts of things is the be-all and end-all. But the fact of the matter is, if you sit down for those people who came on the world, they'll tell you that's not going to work. That's not going to work. That used to work. But that's not going to work anymore. Why? Because my friends do this, this, and this, and this. It's a different mindset now. Very often, because, and just so that we can, I'll take your point and we'll go on. Very often, we get to the point where we're stuck and we don't understand that we're dealing with a completely different generation who thinks in a completely different way, right? And so we get so comfortable in our own mindsets, but we're unwilling to step outside and recognize that our brains are just not wired that way. And so as we get older, unless you have an attitude of adventure and consistent change, then it's quite easy for you to start becoming fossilized, and then you're unwilling to hear different ideas. Yes?
I think there needs to be a balance. I think because sometimes young people have a tendency to kind of let go stuff that they think.
Oh, push the boundaries to the hilt, I agree.
And then you have people who are in senior years are saying, look, that was made of Adventists.
Yes, yes.
You know, and
So there has to be a balance.
There has to be a balance.
Yes, there has to be a balance. But again, the problem comes not with the fact that not younger people are coming or that older people are not there. The problem comes is the fact that we don't want the older ones, the younger one side to move into position. That's the problem.
Yes.
So if we have the right balance with those who have the experience and we have the younger one, the young horses with the ideas, it's a great combination.
Yes.
It's a great combination. Yes, Sister Alana? I'm sorry.
And also now they've got blacks coming into the organization during these years. And so
At higher levels too.
yeah, at that level. So now how are we can black people lead themselves and because I've been in slavery for so many years.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
it did become an issue.
Yes.
She wrote the book Southern Work as a result of what was happening in the South and the reorganization of our church.
Agreed.
I think, if I remember, I think the old gentleman, no, I'll come back to it.
Okay.
I think of the name.
Yes.
Oh, I know it is.
Mhm. You remember?
Cleveland, I think, was
Yes,
the
yes, the
first,
preacher, yes, yes.
first General Conference worker, and that was in 1946.
So let's think about that,
So-
right?
So
It
his-
took a
to
long,
work-
Cleveland,
yes.
yes.
So you can see how long it took
Great
blacks
evangelist, yeah, great
before
evangelist,
they
yeah.
got into the General Conference level.
Indeed. Yes, Elder Stewart?
Like the church is supposed to be a movement, so you can't
Yes.
stand still.
Agreed. And they realize that, again, remember, this is something that Ellen White has continually told them that, we have to keep moving on. Obviously, we need to be wise about how we do that. But what we cannot do is shut people out that have different ideas. Because, again, we'll go right back to 1888. That's what it was. Different people came in with different ideas, and the older ones did not want to let it go or even consider it. That was the problem. So on the first day of the session, she again called for reorganization. Look at this now, speaking specifically against those who would wield kingly power. That cannot be in this church. Remember, even Christ says that the lords in the natural world or whatever, they wield power over you, but it shall not be so among you. You remember that? You shall be servants, yes? So for those who like kingly power, then leadership is not for them. Because if you don't have a servant's mind, you're going to be the worst leader ever. So her plea, and I have to give props to him or whatever, her plea led to Daniel saying, you know what, let's skip normal business or whatever, let's get to the reorganization. Let's deal with that in this GC session. So he was called. I mean, obviously he had the mindset. He wasn't even necessarily a young fella, but he realized what had to go on, right? And so because of that, he was allowed to lead, and he was also the president anyway. So he and W.C. White were prominent in establishing the Australian Solution President, which is what we talked about a bit earlier. So, as we talked about earlier, that same structure exists today, correct? What's the one modification? Between 1913 and 1918, a fourth administrative level was added, divisions of the GC. So where are we? We're at the local church level, then we have conferences, then we have unions, then we have divisions, yes? Which make up the General Conference. So each division, as we know now, each division is a GC vice president, which we know now. That's how it is today. So let's talk about the administrative structure of Adventism. We have the General Conference, like I started explaining. Then we have the divisions of the General Conference. We have the union conferences and union mission conferences. Did we talk about the union mission conferences and all that before? We talked about that, right? What the difference are between missions and conferences? Hmm? Okay, well, let's go for that. Let's go for that. So you have union conferences and you have union mission conferences, right? So again, a mission is a group of churches or whatever that are not financially able to take care of themselves yet, or they haven't necessarily met the criteria to become a full-fledged conference yet. Okay, there's certain criteria that you have to satisfy before you can be. So at one point in time, some of you might remember that we were a mission. And then we become a conference ourselves, yes? And then you have your local conferences and missions of each union conference. So again, this is where we are at this point. We're at the local conference level. Yes. Oh yeah, no problem. So let's start with the local conference. Local conferences is where we're at. So we have churches that form up local conferences, yes? Oh, Mandas. Was it? Yeah.
And then the union conference would be equivalent to what?
The union conferences will be, not in Bermuda. The union conferences will be the head. So Dr. Mandas and all of those who are responsible for conferences, they form the union conferences. Well, those who are responsible for the union conferences, they now go up to the division conferences. They form those.
Which would be the New York conference, right?
Yes, and no. The New York conference itself is just a local conference. We have a union conference. Remember, we had the Atlantic Union Conference.
Right, which comes under the 6.
Yes.
Well, I'm just asking.
No, but it's necessary because other people are listening.
Okay. So I just want to know, we have the Atlantic Union Conference,
Yes.
right, which Bermuda's a part of.
Yes.
But there are 6 other conferences that are part of the Atlantic Union Conference. Greater New York,
Yes.
Southeastern,
Yes.
right? New York Conference.
Yes.
And I can't remember what the other ones
Those are local conferences.
Right. I
Yes.
just wanted to do that so that everybody knows how we
Yes,
actually-
of course,
how
of course,
it
yeah.
all plays out.
But yes, those are all local conferences, yes. And their leaders form the union. Those conferences form the union. And then we have unions that form divisions. And the divisions form the general conference. Any other questions on that? Okay. So 1901 GC conference session helped to solve much of the over-centralization and decentralizing issues in the SCA structure. So again, we can see where this works out. It's established continuity of administration at every level of the organization. So again, when you look at it, very often you will see the very same thing. So at the local conference level, we have the president, and then we have the board, that type of thing. But we also have departmental heads at the local church level. When we go to the union, the Atlantic Union, I'm using our union for the example. When we go there or whatever, you have the same thing. You have the president who's one responsible for that. You have those that are on the board, but you also have those who are responsible for particular departments at the union level. And then it goes up to the next level. And it's the same thing. You got what I'm saying? Okay. Yes?
Just one question. The power, should it be in the church level, or should the power be as far as change?
Yes.
Because sometimes it's just kind of confusing that sometimes that we have a board meeting, and at the board meeting, of course, decisions are made
Yes.
that affect the church. Can the general conference or the conference kind of dictate a change in a church without their
A change in a church? No.
okay.
No. So what happens is that the church is, I wouldn't say it's an entity unto its own, but the body itself, the buildings belong to the conference, right?
Yeah.
But the church itself gets to make its own decisions. But again, they're governed by what they agree to govern by when they become a part of this denomination. Now, if there are issues that then a church has a right to go to the conference and voice their concerns. So again, remember, the power, for as much as we like to think, is up the top, but the truth of it is that if all the people down below rebel, then what you gonna do? And I'm using rebellion as in a loose way, but the point is, if they don't agree, so in other words, we choose representatives because we have a representative type model. And so we choose representatives to represent us at these particular levels. If we're not pleased with that, then the opportunity comes when it's time to vote them out. Bye-bye, see you later. That's why we get that. So again, the power really lies at the bottom, even though sometimes it seems it takes a while for it to show up. Yeah? Sure.
In the event, say for example, in the California conference or so, that had a different decision about women's ordination, and say, for example, they ordained women as ministers there, say, for example. So you have the women that are heading churches in that conference. So how is it that if all the power feeds up into the general conference,
Yes.
and the general conference has taken a position that, no, we are not ordaining,
Right.
then how can you have ordained women ministers in conferences, and which is in direct opposition to what is at the general conference level?
Okay, valid question.
And that could be any, and not just because it's not about women's
No,
ordination.
it's about
but
anything.
just
It's about anything.
Yeah.
And you have a valid question. And so let me tell you how this works. What happens is that they're actually in rebellion against the General Conference at this point. And the General Conference has a responsibility to deal with them. Now the question now comes, how will you deal with them? Because not only does it have to be fair, but it needs to be seen to be fair. It's a contentious issue, so you need to be careful about it. And the fact of the matter is they know it's a contentious issue, so they're doing what they're doing anyway. But on the other side too, let's also recognize that the US, which is largely one of the groups that are doing it, very often they have a lot of power, a lot of finances, right? So, and we know America being supposedly the sort of financial powerhouse of the world still to this day, whether we want to argue about it or not. The fact of the matter is that they provide most of the funding to a large degree. So when you start deciding that you want to take them on, you better be very careful about it, because it could cause the whole church to sort of disrupt. And so I don't envy the position that they're in, having to deal with this here at all, because when you have a behemoth the size of North American division coming up and saying, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, then be very careful how you handle that. And so you're asking how, I would say, how do you handle it? Very carefully. Very carefully, because again, they have to deal with it. At some point in time, they have to deal with it. How and when, I don't know. It's been an ongoing circumstance and situation again, and we're just sitting around watching to see what happens. But at some point in time, they are going to have to address that. They're going to have to. Yes.
Yeah, actually, at one time, the North American division was even threatening to separate from the organization.
Which again, right? So we're looking at it from that point of view. Now, my thought is at the end of it that the North American division ought to be very careful too, because sometimes we think we're more powerful than we actually are. And just because there's a pocket of us, if that's what the case is, we believe that there's a larger group. What happens if it's just a pocket of us that believe what we're espousing to believe? What happens now is that you have everybody who abdicates and walks out, and then what's left of the division? Because people can go off and walk off and start their own thing, and they don't have to deal with it anymore. So again, this is why it's such a ticklish situation, because what you don't want to do is disrupt the whole situation. So again, we're fighting and fussing about women's ordination, and the work is going by the wayside. Because somebody's got to have their own way, regardless of what everybody else thinks. So again, I think it's a pointed question and a necessary question, but I can't tell you how they're going to deal with it or answer it. I know how ideally they have to deal with it, and that's the General Conference that's going to have to address it. That's it. Yes.
She had a vision one time about the ship being hitting the iceberg.
Yes.
And she said that it broke up, but it remained. God is always going to have a faithful church.
Oh, I agree. I agree.
And we just need to allow. We just need to whatever happens to happen, because there are some things that you're not going to be able to avoid.
No.
And God will make right wrongs and wrong
Oh, I
rights.
agree. I totally agree. I agree.
And so sometimes we have to just let it
Bite the
play
bullet.
out and see what happens.
I agree.
We'll
So
we'll
again,
fix it.
let's also be clear that, she's also made it clear to us that whole conferences will be lost, right? And so specifically why these conferences will be lost, we don't know all the reasons for that. But again, at the end of it all, it's going to come down to the church as an institution. Is that what will stand, and will they walk according to what the Word of God says, instead of saying, okay, because this is a politically hot topic, we need to make sure that we err on the side of what the politics say. Well, we don't operate by politics. We operate by the Word of God, right? And so based on that, that's really argument. But again, on the other side too, there are those that say, well, we believe this is what the Word of God says. It's a rough situation. It really is, right? Yes. Well, yeah.
I think another thing that's on the table that's about organization, and that is in Bermuda and in the States, in order to be organized, all you needed was a name and a following. But there's another level that makes you a corporation, that is the 501c3.
Yes.
And that's the danger. Should the church be a 501c3? Should it be a corporation, a part of the state? Or should we just be, because you can start a church in Bermuda, just have a name and a following.
Yes.
And so you need to be incorporated, and all the benefits of a church are in being a church, and there's no extra benefits of being a corporation. But the difficult part is, if you decide to get out of a 501c3, you lose everything that you accumulated
Yes.
while you were in a 501c3.
Yes, that's right. So again, we have to ask ourselves at the end of it all, what's more important? Are we going to move according to principle, or are we going to move according to what we have? If you get my point? Because at the end of it all, I mean, well, it's all going to burn anyway, but that's not the point. The point is, at the end of it all, is that at some point in time, we're going to have to stand on principle and let the chips fall where they may. And that's just the bottom line. Yeah. And God's people are always going to have to make those decisions. We stand to lose those. So again, don't get attached to stuff. Don't get attached to anything, because the fact of the matter is that you're a steward, and as long as you have the, not that steward, right? Right? You are a steward. And as long as you recognize that it's not yours, then it's okay for you to walk away from it. But once you start claiming ownership, that's when it becomes a problem. Yes, indeed. It is wrong spelling. It's wrong spelling, I know. So okay, again, it established, again, what it established? Continuity of administration at every level of the organization, thereby unifying and coordinating the church's efforts. Things are moving along nicely. So now there's tension in the power structure, as you can imagine there would be. One major So what's one major exception to the departmental organization scheme in 1901 was the Medical Missionary and Benevolent Association, presided over by John Harvey Kellogg. Why do you think that was a problem? Because what? Because of pantheism, yes. And so we're looking at this guy now who is a pantheist. He's having issues with the General Conference and the difference in beliefs, right? And also for the fact that he, when it comes to Medical Missionary and Benevolent Association or whatever, he presides over it. And so with all of his influence and the things that he was bringing in, he felt he could pretty much do what he wanted to do. And that's it right there. He loved his independence and the fact that the GC was severely weakened and that it had no president at the time. So because there was no president, there was nobody who was really going to come up against him, because again, if there's nobody to lead the charge that really has the influence that they actually need, that he was okay to sit where he was, but it didn't stay like that, right? Yes.
Well, one of the things I appreciate about Kellogg is that even though he messed up, but he was very forefront, and like today, we have very few medical missionaries.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And that's because that he kind of took the work away from us in that sense, that we didn't have that push. Because even medical missionaries were even supported from the tide.
Right.
And so today, there are, I remember one time I counted them as 30-something medical missionaries in Bermuda who have gone to YouTube Pines or one of them places,
Yes.
but are not doing the work because they can't afford.
They can't afford to, yes, to do it full time.
And
Yeah.
so, we are in a catch-20.
It's a difficult situation, yeah, and don't be surprised by that, because again, we're talking about last days, and the enemy is going to come with everything he can, right? So he's going to try to undermine everything he possibly can. So again, so we're looking at Kellogg, who's loving it right now because there's no president. So Kellogg basically feels that, you know what, I can do anything. I am presiding over this thing or whatever. This thing has a lot of clout, and I'm just basically living my life. So here's the thing. The 1901 session voted that the executive committee would run the GC. So now we have a problem. Now we have a problem. So he was even more empowered. Why? Because the delegates, when the delegates gave him that 1/4 of the executive committee votes to his medical organization. Right? So you got Kellogg. So they already have a 1/4, right? If they get another 1/4 on their side, they won the vote, right?
Yeah.
They won the vote. And so Kellogg, again, let's understand what was going on here. We're talking about politics, right? So politics, he understood. Let me get another 1/4 of it. And you know some of them were his friends. You don't get to that point and not have friends. So those votes, again, combined with those of his friends, which I said, might have enabled him to stay independent and control. Think about this now. Not only would have been independent, but he would have controlled GC decisions. Would that have been good? A pantheist in charge of the GC. How's that going to work out? So what did Daniels do? Daniels killed that idea really quick. So both of them were very strong-hearted, I'll put it that way. And so if he thought he could control Daniels, in 1902, that illusion was what? Crashed, smashed. Shattered, absolutely shattered. The problem between the two was financial, yes? How? Kellogg was used to doing things his way until 1902. February 18, 1902, Battle Creek Sanitarium burned to the ground. Remember, we just started talking about that. Burned to the ground. So these leaders, now backed by Ellen White, wanted to reconstruct a modest building. What did Kellogg want? He wanted to outbuild the previous edifice and began scheming. Never a good word when you're talking about a Christian. Scheming. So again, more problematic was the building of the sanitarium in Great Britain. Both Kellogg and Daniels, so remember A.T. Daniels, right? Kellogg's and Daniels, A.G., sorry, Daniels, they wanted the building, but Daniels didn't want deficit spending. In other words, he did not want to go into debt to get it. So if you're not going to go into debt to get it, then the elaborate sort of ideas that you have, they sort of become more realistic, you know? Yes.
And actually, he was going against the counsel that Ms. White was given. Ms. White was saying that our sanitariums should be small.
Yes.
They shouldn't be large,
Yes, indeed.
elaborate
Yes, indeed.
buildings.
And neither should our churches, but anyway,
Yes.
yeah.
And as a result of him burning down the small one, he even built a bigger one when he rebuilt it.
Yeah,
But you have to look at Kellogg, because Kellogg was bringing a lot of influential people into the church.
well, clearly he
There were
was. I mean, he was a
doctors,
person of influence.
there
Oh,
were
yeah.
kings and everybody that comes
Yes,
to
indeed.
Battle Creek. for
Yes,
his
they will
help.
come to Battle Creek. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, the mic, please.
I personally believe when it comes to evangelism that you spread the net wide, right? However, if we go through our process of giving people Bible studies, that whole filtering process helps individuals, and what you're doing here helps individuals to discern whether or not their philosophies match
Yes.
what God's word is and what our direction is. Why? Is because I've seen over the years where we have engaged in relationships with politicians. They come to our camp meetings
Yes.
and various things. Now, it's good to befriend them and as a part of that, but not to actually start to take on their agendas.
Agreed. Agreed.
And that's one thing that it's easy for us to fall entrapped.
If
an
we're not careful.
entrapment
If we're not
into.
careful. Yeah.
And, we have to be very careful of that. And especially when we have, the intentions of leadership to try to help them to become a part of us. That they still need to be filtered.
Yes.
they
Well, through the very
they
same processes, right?
Yeah,
Same
they still need
processes.
to be filtered. So yeah, in this case where you see Kellogg, who was very influential, who was getting money to come into the church, that's all good. But that doesn't mean that these people who are giving the money to the church have the power to say things in the church, and that's where we have to filter.
Oh, I agree. Thank you for bringing that point up. So Kellogg was furious. Why? Because he was used to getting his way with the previous two GC administrators, which is what you mentioned. Yes, Elder Stewart.
A lot of times when you use people like that, they're the politicians or whatever, right? They tend to want something for what they put in.
That's the nature of politics, right? So we have to be very careful. And you have something to say? Oh, okay. Then. So what did Kellogg do? He set about to replace Daniels as GC committee chairman. Why? Because he couldn't get his way. So now that tells you what type of spirit that he had. Because he didn't want to accept the decision of the conference itself and who they chose. He wanted to get rid of him. So now you know what type of agenda he had. It was about power and not necessarily about God's movement. So Kellogg's coup attempt failed as he tried to get A.T. Jones voted in as president. Remember A.T. Jones? Right? A.T. Jones was the guy that came out again with Jones and Wagner with the righteousness by faith message. But again, A.T. Jones, that failed. 1903 GC session, delegates reinstated the office of the president. Remember that wasn't there? Now it's there again. He voted A.G. Daniels in as GC president. Now remember Daniels, even though he wanted another sanatorium, he didn't want what Kellogg wanted. So his opinion hasn't changed now. So Kellogg is really vexed now because this guy is the one who said no. And so now I can't control him, right? So here's the thing. Worse, also voted to place all denomination-operated institutions under direct denominational ownership. What did that do to Kellogg? Because remember, he was independent all this time, correct? But now all the institutions now are coming under the GC, and so his independence is gone. It's gone.
So, Pastor,
Yes.
why would A.T. Jones be a candidate that Kellogg wanted if A.T. Jones was wanted righteousness by faith? I'm assuming
Yes.
that he would have been, of the mindset where he is not looking for the same thing that Kellogg's wanted. Why would A.T. Jones then be an attractive candidate to Kellogg? What would Kellogg have gotten had A.T. Jones been voted in as president?
Okay. I will tell you this part, that just because a person understands a particular doctrine doesn't necessarily mean they live by it. All right? So again, what we'll see, and I'm not sure if I have it in these slides, maybe I do, what we'll see as time goes on, that A.T. Jones actually ended up being out of the church. Yeah? But he was somebody that Kellogg would thought that he would be able to manipulate, right? So whenever it comes to that, so think about it. Those who manipulate, they don't look for people that they can't manipulate. The only people they want to put in are puppets so that they can control them from wherever they are. So if he chose A.T. Jones, Jones would have had to agree with what he agreed with, and he may not have known it, but Kellogg was going to control him because he was far more influential than Jones was. So again, what was another problem? The theological deviations we've been talking about when it comes to pantheism, but they didn't help in it. Nobody was listening to him at that point. So here's what he wrote. There is present in the tree a power which creates and maintains it, a tree maker in a tree, a flower maker in the flower. This is classic pantheism. But that's his beliefs. That's what he wrote, the living temple. That's what he wrote, right? Classic pantheism. So again, pantheism makes God a part of nature rather than above it. God creating nature but being a separate and apart and above it is what we believe. Pantheism says God is a part of nature. So in other words, God is in everything. God is in a rock. God is in a tree. God is in a chair. God is in everything. Yeah? So look, both of these guys, right? So remember A.T. Jones and Wagner now, right? They also believe as Kellogg did. So now you will understand why this would have been a bad idea to have a pantheist, because they started believing as he did. So you're talking about both, now, think about it now, both of the guys who are talking about righteousness by faith, and to their own degree, they're now believing as Kellogg did. Well, what happens to righteousness by faith? So 1903, E.G. White tried to bring peace between the factions, but increasingly supported Daniels, which, of course, Kellogg didn't like. Why? Because, as was discovered here today, they had a relationship, right? There we go. He left the church, disfellowshipped in 1907. Why? Because he couldn't get his own way. Now, do you think Kellogg's the only person who left the church because they couldn't get their way? Right? We're talking about the human experience, right?
Wagner and Jones end up leaving the church.
Exactly. That's what I'm getting to. And I said that earlier, that you'll see as time goes on, that they themselves, the guys who were the champions of righteousness by faith, which again, even I try to remember how she puts it or whatever, but at some point in time, some of the people that we saw as stars, they're going to burn out and they're going to leave, right? There we go. My next statement, yes. A.T. Jones and Wagner left the church. Yes. I'll get him first, then I get you. Yeah.
But that's just how Satan works.
Yes.
Satan always chooses the brightest, and sometimes we have a tendency to look down upon those individuals, but they were deceived.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and deception, that just shows us how close we have to be to God, because
Yes.
deception is so real. If we could see deception coming, it wouldn't be deception.
Indeed.
And I've seen that. What was the other guy? It was Cartwright, or he was
Yes,
another
yes, yes,
person?
yes, 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 yes.
Dwight Cartwright, or Kentwright, sorry.
Yes.
But you see that replete and amongst our institution is that individuals who God is trying to use for the advancement of his kingdom are deceived by the enemy so that the kingdom gets stunted
Yes.
and doesn't advance.
Exactly. That's the
And
idea.
so this is why we need to pray for one another,
Mhm.
encourage one another, look out for one another. When people go missing from church, go look for them. Don't leave them out there. You know, people. We are in a battle. We are on a battleship,
Indeed.
not a cruise ship.
And not lifting people up as gods. Right? Because again, you can imagine the amount of recognition that these got. They were younger guys or whatever, some were considered to be novices to a certain degree. And when they came in with the righteousness by faith, you can imagine now, they were getting invited everywhere. They became very influential. And so very often when that happens, we have a tendency to prop people up. And I've said it before, we prop people up. And then guess what? When they show one clink in the armor, we forget who they are. And so the next thing you know, they've dropped them. We're saying, well, what happened to you? And we leave them, exactly. You had something you wanted to say? Yes.
Yes. The 1888 rejection,
Is that Michael? You heard it? Is that Michael?
yeah, this is the one, yes.
Okay, okay, yeah.
The 1888 rejection kind of gave birth to what happened in 1902.
Yes.
We did go through a revival between 88 and 1906. There was kind of revival going on in the church. People were confessing their sin. But then when Pentheism came in, it split the church. And then after Wagner and Jones left the church, they were using that as a means to say, well, the message couldn't have been correct if they're going out of the church.
Right. But the message was right. But something happened with the messengers, yes?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes.
Then in the church, why is there still so much obedience when you have political people that come to visit church at any time? There's
Why is there so much?
so much recognition, so much not just a welcome, but just so much almost conceding of their presence when they come into church for visitation at any. Why do the pastors give so much attention to elected officials when they come into church?
Well, one part of it is the fact that we're supposed to respect our leaders, right?
Yeah.
No, we're not
understanding.
necessarily supposed to give them a bully pulpit. No. Again, so if they get up there and start talking some rhetoric, then we have the responsibility to pull them down if that's the case. But outside of that, we're supposed to respect our worldly leaders. We're supposed to pray for them. We're supposed to respect them. But again, recognizing at the end of it that their power in this institution is limited. As a matter of fact, that it's not. We just give due respect to the leaders that we're supposed to.
I say that only because sometimes it seems a bit much.
I agree.
Yeah, not just that, we want to welcome, the representative from whatever, constituency or so, but sometimes it just seems a bit much, as if they're coming to bring, but they are coming before the king. They are not themselves bringing any value to their presence here.
So, okay, so let's just discuss that for a moment, right? What you're seeing right there are those who are respecters of persons. If you get what I'm saying. So those who are excited about it are respecters of persons. Because there's a way that you can introduce that does not lift the person up. There's a way that you can introduce where you're not getting overly excited. You can recognize their presence or whatever and give due diligence, or not diligence, but due, what's the word I'm looking for? Regard to who they are, yes? And then you can move on. So again, it will always come down to the person that is doing it, because you can tell whether or not they are respecter of persons or not. But that's all I have to say.
Sometimes those people who are doing it know them personally, so that's part of the reason why.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, but then it also takes into consideration that if this is a public figure and there may or may not be certain acts that they, or how they live their lives may be known, but if when they come into God's house and it seems as if there is an exaggerated amount of importance put on them, then it can look as if that for the position absolves them
Indeed.
from
The life
some
they're living,
standard
the life
which
they're
is already, set out in God. In
I
God's
agree.
church, there's no value.
Agreed.
to
So I
those
can, I can go
things.
back to what I said just a minute earlier in the sense that we have to be careful who we put up on a podium, right? And it doesn't matter whether or not it's a person in church or a person out of church, that we all suffer from that issue that's called pride. And if we get pumped up, we actually start to believe the advertisements, right? And so we can do it. It can happen to those who are in church as well as it can happen to those who are outside. So we have to be just as careful no matter who it is. Right? But thank you for bringing that point up. So again, as we can see, Wagner and Jones, they also left the church. So there we go with that. Jones fought against Adventism for the rest of his life. This is the guy that came with righteousness by faith. Which is why, again, you can't judge a person at any particular time in their life. The race is not for the swift, but for the sure, for those who endure to the end, right? So what happened now? The Kellogg Schism split several Adventist theologians away from the denomination. So you can see what influence he had, right? And so now his influence is having an issue on the denomination at large. So again, let's talk about Kellogg. Let's look at Kellogg and then use him as a possible representative of what's happening now when it comes to what Brother Gilbert said about the North American division threatening to break away from the General Conference, right? Do you think if they broke away from the General Conference that others wouldn't go to? Right? Because they have influence, right? So these things are happening. So who would be behind that? Right? Yes.
I just have a question concerning that Rockaway, this building doesn't belong to the membership.
None of the buildings belong to the membership.
It belongs to the conference.
Yes.
And so what happens if there's a breakaway and you guys decide, well, I want to stay with mainstream Adventists? The conference can take this building away from you.
That's true. That's
and you
true.
would have to start, even though you put all your money into it and built it, to me that it seems kind of almost borders on extortion.
How so? How so?
That you bought the building, you built it, you sweat, put it into this building, Brother Smith, all these guys came late nights working.
But let's think about it. Let's think about it from God's point of view. This is all God's money. So we didn't buy the building. We are stewards of the money. Yeah. And then we bought this building, and it's under the care of the General Conference simply for the fact that this is the entity by which he said that this is how we're going to do what we do. So it's not our money. You with me? We pay tithe and we do the things that we do because this is God's money and God has asked us to give back. If it ends up that we end up paying for a church, we do that. But we recognize from the very beginning, this building doesn't belong to any one of us. You see what I'm saying? Yes. So we always, again, like I mentioned earlier, about the fact that we must always adopt an attitude of stewardship and not ownership. Because ownership's what gets us in trouble. Yes. And that's how Satan's going to get us in the end. Because again, for a lot of us, it's going to be ownership that he's going to get us on. You went out there, you bought your house, you bought your car, you got all your retirement saved and all that stuff, and all you're saying to yourself is, I earned it all. And Satan's saying, really, well, let's see what you're willing to give up. Because I'm telling you right now that if you continue to serve, or should I say worship, the same way you continue to worship, I'm going to take it all from you. The person who's an owner says, oh, no, you won't. I'm going to do everything I can to keep it. The person who's a steward says, you can have it. So you see the difference in the mindset, yeah? So that's the reason why this is not ours. It belongs to the conference. It belongs to God ultimately. So we have no claim to this building. And the more, and the sooner we get comfortable with that, the easier it is for us, yeah? So his schism, again, caused several Adventist theologians away from the denomination. But he gained control of the rebuilt Battle Creek Sanitarium and the Church Medical School, American Missionary College. So, okay. 1902 was a most troublesome year. Why? February 18th, the sanitarium burned to the ground. December 30th, the publishing house caught fire and was beyond saving within an hour. So both major buildings burned to the ground within 1 year. You think that was by an accident?
Yeah, and the reason why the publishing house burned is because they printed calculated books.
Yes, that's a problem again, right? And Alan White was talking about it and complaining about it, but that got dealt with, right? So you start printing things on God's press that he is not pleased with or whatever, he will deal with it himself, as he did in this particular situation. And in particular, when you're talking about the work now is just growing, he could not afford that. You couldn't afford for them to be sending out this sort of doctrine out there where people are going to be taking this and believing it. Because again, remember, for a lot of them, we're still looking at it to the point whereas this is church to them. So they're getting these leaflets, and they're believing that this is what it is. And so, God had to deal with that immediately. So again, through the leadership of Daniels and Prescott with Ellen White's guidance, SDA was built on a firmer foundation than ever before, even though those things burned to the ground. So next week, we will look at the area of reorganization and crisis, the Battle Creek Exodus, and new beginnings. But no, we're not there yet. So early 1900s, Battle Creek had become over-centralized as the power base of the world Adventism, as I said earlier. So it had become central, over-centralized, and well, does God ever like anything over-centralized? So it was hindering the Adventist mission. As you can imagine, everybody wanted to stay home and nobody wanted to go out and build a house somewhere. Yeah? So it was time for breakout. 1901, the leadership decided to transfer Battle Creek College out of the city to Berrien Springs, Michigan, named it Emmanuel Missionary College. Deliberately, they did that to start moving people out of the centralized area. So they were trying to do what God was telling them to do. So remember, publishing house caught fire and was beyond saving within 1 hour. So what does that tell you? God clearly wants you to do something, right? So it provided an opportunity to move both the publishing house and the general conference out of the city. So this is where we are now, Tacoma Park, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C., which depicted, I showed you the very first sort of meeting that we had. Yeah? So in the next 2 years, the General Conference View and Herald Publishing House was established in Tacoma Park. So now we're now in the U.S. Oh, we're always in the U.S., but now we're in Maryland, sorry. So the Washington Sanitarium, Washington Adventist Hospital, and Washington Training College, later the Washington Foreign Missionary Seminary, Columbia Union College, was established a couple of miles away. So things are moving, yes, moving out of Berrien Springs and Michigan and all those things and moving to different places to break up the centralization. The View Review and Herald Publishing House also moved to Maryland. But to me, let me tell you what's funny to me. Although they moved out of Michigan, but they still moved into a place that everything seemed like was centralized again, right? I don't know, but anyway, yeah, okay. That's just me, I mean, because everything here is in Maryland, so yeah. So the General Conference of Silver Springs, Maryland, still in Maryland, 1989, yeah? So again, the move from Battle Creek caused a major shift in the Adventist medical program. The new sanitariums were smaller and in more locations, Brother Gilbert, as you said. Yes, that was the council we had anyway. And Kellogg wanted to do his own thing, but now that Kellogg was going and doing his own thing, he could do what he wanted to do. We were now able to do it the way we were supposed to do it. So in 1904, we had the Paradise Valley Sanitarium. That's 8 years as a private venture, and it was deeded as a gift to the SDA in 1912. Then we had Glendale, we had Hinsdale, we had Loma Linda, South California, all bargain property purchases. The work is growing, yes? And not just in Berrien Springs. It's all over the place now. So Loma Linda's greatest contribution was not what the sanitarium, it became the headquarters for the training of Adventist medical practitioners. Yes, that building, and some of you would have seen that in the first presentation, yes? College of Medical Evangelists was incorporated in December 1909. So I mean, obviously it didn't look like that at that point. But again, we're talking about the fact that major moves are going on when it comes to medical evangelists and things of that nature. It is a major work. The right hand of the gospel, yes, it is a major work. Now known as Loma Linda University, as we know. So then you have the Madison College, established in Tennessee. So think how quickly these things are happening now. We're talking about within years now. Within a couple of years, these things are starting to happen, yes?
One danger in today is that a lot of our hospitals are moving away from the natural remedies and they're going to the more...
The Western medicine, right?
The Western medicine.
Yeah,
and
that's a challenge.
We have to be careful that we don't move. I know I talked to one brother and he said, Alan, you think that, yes, in Alan White's day, they're using hydrotherapy, but today we're more advanced. I can't see, for instance, if a guy has gangrene, we cut it off. But if we took him to a medical missionary, we would use hot and cold treatment and bring circulation back to the
Yes,
leg.
indeed. Yes, indeed.
And so I can't say how you call that being advanced.
Gotcha, yes, yes. Oh, I agree, the guy loses his toe, right? I agree, yeah, I agree. What do you call advanced, yeah? So now, again, we're unique in 2 ways, right? The Madison College was established in Tennessee, and it was unique in 2 ways. How? Number one, it was self-supporting. In other words, it didn't have regular conference support, as others did. It became a base for sending out self-supporting workers to new locations, specifically the American South, which is what? The black work, yes? To a large degree. So addition of sanitarium set model for southern expansion and strengthened conference structure. So again, all of these things are going on. It's becoming more decentralized. These buildings are going all over the place. The medical work is moving in leaps and bounds, and the work is continuing to grow. Specifically, again, it goes to the southern expansion, yes, and the conference structure is just getting stronger. So again, in the earlier, we will remember that it was the church's strong emphasis on mission that led to reorganization. Remember that? Because it started going all over the world that we had to become reorganized. You remember that, all right? So between 1901 to 1910, the mission missiology gained a new emphasis, large city evangelism. By the end of the first decade, we were ready to infiltrate the world with the three angels' messages. So by the end of that first decade in the 20th century, everything was in place. We were ready to go out and get the three angels' message throughout the whole world. Guys, we have reached the end of that particular one. We saw where we got to at 1910. We are at the point now where we're ready to explode into the whole world because now everything's been put in place. When we come back next time, we'll look at the era of worldwide growth. Any questions? Yes, Mike?
Will we be meeting next week?
Oh, right, in it. That's right. We're out. No, because we're going to be out. We're going to be up at the park. Yeah, we're going to be at the park. And I think that's important that we're at the park. We're going to be at the park. Yeah. So next week we will be up at Scholar. Yeah. Any other questions, guys? Yes. You got a mic comment? Is there any comments we take around the mic comments?
I just want to say that I think this is very good what you're doing. It's definitely a good refresher to remember why we started and what our objective is. The only concern I have is sometimes is that the simplicity of the gospel goes out the door because we have so much other stuff that we get involved in. I say that primarily because if we don't know the simplicity of the gospel, most times we don't spread it.
Yeah, true.
You know what I mean?
That's true.
We stay and become comfortable in this environment. We stay here and we go through all the different programs.
Yes.
And I just want to encourage people to really recognize that the church was modeled to grow and not to become stagnant. And
Agreed.
that growth means growing in us. I'm losing my voice, by the way. Growing in us so that we could actually share it
Indeed.
with individuals. There's a world out there of people who don't know a quarter of what we know.
Oh, agreed.
And every opportunity that we have, that we should just ask God to help us. I was on the plane on Wednesday. On Wednesday, and there was a lady who was sitting next to me who, as we started conversating about prayer. And she said, yeah, I'm part of a prayer group. We do our rosary prayers all the time. And I thought to myself, man, this is just one woman. Imagine how many other people on this plane believe that they're in the right salvation, but aren't. And you know, whenever God gives us opportunities, we just need to say, God, open up the door. Let me plant the seed in some way for this individual to meet the next person,
Indeed.
to help them on a journey, rather than just sit on the plane comfortably, not conversate with the person next with you. You're just sitting there and you're just looking to get to your destination.
Indeed.
We have so many opportunities around us to just share a little snippet of what we know to help plant seeds. So that's what I want to encourage people, that even as we're doing this, is that we need to share it.
Yeah. And remember, we're always on the job, right? We're always on the job, yes.
And just one thing, God works through organization, but we have to be careful that we don't get too organized to the point where we leave out working out the Holy Spirit.
Oh, I totally agree. I totally agree. I totally agree. Agreed. And that's something that we have to be careful of at all times, right? I mean, even when you talk about something as simple as a church service, it can become so rigid that the Holy Spirit can't move, and we can't allow that, right? It has to be to the point where it's flexible enough that things can change at the minute or in the middle or done, yeah. And let's pray. Father, thank you so much again for the opportunity to come. You have, Lord, you're revealing so much to us about how we arrived at the point we are today. And we're so thankful because we can look and see that you have been with us from the very beginning. And so we're praying even now, loving God, that as we take this information in, that you will continue to move on our hearts, that we might remember the importance of the message that you have given us and how you have structured and set it up, Lord, that we can take this message throughout the whole world. And so, Father, that's our prayer, that this message will continue to go throughout the whole world with our help and with the help of all of those who call themselves by your name. This we ask in the precious name of Jesus. Let everyone say amen. Drive safely, everyone.